Welcome to day 3 of Business of Flight Week. If anyone doesn't know by now, I'm Shannon Gibson. I'm the Dean of the O'Malley College of Business. And this is the week when we highlight all things related to the business of life. And we are so fortunate today that we are able to bring to you a very unique panel. Some of you may have had the great fortune in the fall to be in classes or in the presentation made by Kriya Shortt, our newest executive in residence to join the College of Business. She joins us today as part of a panel that includes her daughter, Holly Shortt. Both women are affiliated with Textron Aviation. And what I love about this is many of you come from families of aviation. It's not uncommon for the aviation bug to be there and be part of who you are. But when I have the good fortune to be able to bring 2 women forth who are both charging forward in this environment and doing great things, it just doesn't get any better than that for me. We are lucky to have 2 wonderful students moderating the panel, both Molly and Grace, undergrad and grad students represented, and they have put together an amazing series of questions. And without further ado, ladies, take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for both of you coming here and taking your time. So I just want to
Big voice.
Okay, so I just want to start off with a little bit about both of you so that they could know you a little bit more about yourselves. So can you share about your educational experiences and how that kind of brought you to this career path?
Yeah. You want me to go first? Okay. So I'm Kriya Shortt. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for coming to listen. So I always like to say, I feel like the luckiest girl in the world. My background is not in aerospace. I went to a small liberal arts college in Southern Missouri, where I studied French and education. I thought I was going to go kind of the academic route and, and teach at a collegiate level. And that did not pan out. So I think what's most interesting for me is like knowing that you could have a background in basically anything, as long as you persevere through getting that degree, you can find your way into business if you're willing to learn and take the opportunity to make that investment.
And then my name's Holly. A little bit of a background as to what I do today, just because I know a lot of you have, had the opportunity to work with my mom and learn all about her. I'm a regional sales associate for Textron Aviation. So what that means is that I support our owners and operators and serve as a resource for them here in Florida. And then I also support all of the new and pre-owned jet and turboprop sales for the state. So namely, that's the Cessna Citations and Caravans, the Beechcraft King Airs, and the Denali. And from an education perspective, my path into aviation hasn't necessarily been the most linear. I graduated from the University of Arizona in 2022 with a degree in communication and dual minors in business administration and French. When I enrolled, I actually enrolled as a physiology major with plans to be in the medical field. And in my freshman year, I got involved with a local hospital and realized pretty quickly that it long-term wasn't going to be the right fit for me. And, in hindsight, I was very lucky to have learned that lesson so early on. But I would definitely say in the moment, it really felt like the rug had kind of been pulled out from under me. And I know I'm not the only college student to have felt that way. So always been a people person, learning about them's always been a passion of mine. So when I kind of went back to square one, that's where I first started. So I enrolled as a communication major, switched my major, focusing a lot on interpersonal relationships and communication. And I would say that that decision combined with an internship in sales I completed with Textron Aviation the following summer sort of set me on my career trajectory to where I am today.
And then the next question I have is for Kriya. Can you give us some history on your career journey? I know you kind of briefly mentioned it, but how did you get started, and did you have a specific goal in mind, or did you always, obviously you said that you didn't always want to join the aviation industry, but was it in the back of your mind?
Yeah, I think being a pilot was kind of in the back of my mind. I was a user of general aviation starting at age 15. And so that kind of was like I'll call it a dormant seed that was planted. And then when I was at university, they did have a 4-year aviation degree, which I did not pursue. I pursued an aviator. And so I think, as you think about kind of who you are as humans and how life will unfold, sometimes there's going to be compromises. That put us on a path where when he took a job in Wichita, Kansas, at Cessna Aircraft, I was the trailing spouse. And so I ended up living in Wichita, not really knowing what I was going to do, but had a freshly minted college degree and a private pilot certificate. So I kind of knew I liked aviation, but I really didn't understand how somebody with my credentials would fit into the industry. And I was lucky that my first role happened to be working for Cessna at the Flying Club. And I treated that as like basically a year-long internship where every person that came in the door, like Holly, I really like people and I like to get to know people. So I just asked a ton of questions. Hey, who are you? What do you do with the company? And what I started to understand was that even though I didn't have a degree that would lend itself necessarily to being an obvious choice for a role, that if I had the opportunity, and I did because I was effectively part of the company, as roles came open, I could put my name in the hat for consideration. And so that first role was one where it was an inside sales role that I took, and that really I still had this nebulous idea that I like sales and marketing, but it started to hone in on the fact that what I really liked was sales. I'm driven. I'm kind of a competitive person. Sales is a fun journey in that regard. It's you have to get to the win, and I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to start honing my sales skills on that inside sales role. And then I've had a myriad of different opportunities across nearly 30 years. So in the interest of time, I won't take you through all of them, but suffice it to say, the career journey did take me through selling citations, leading a global sales organization, and then subsequent areas of the company in service and support. And ultimately in 2023 was asked to take the CEO role for Textron Aviation, which is really the culmination of the 27 precedent years, building relationships, building technical and industry knowledge, and empowering and motivating teams to be successful.
So my next question is to Ollie, and you did talk about your internship a little bit, but I want to know how that kind of helped you into like determining your professional path.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I don't think my career path would look, even remotely similar to how it looks today if it hadn't been for those internship experiences. Like I said, I did my first internship right after I switched my major before I'd even taken the class for my major. So I really owe so much of my career to those experiences. A little bit of a background. So like I mentioned, did that first sales internship the summer following my freshman year. I also completed the same internship prior to my senior year. And then between those two, I held a marketing and communications internship with a family-owned industrial construction firm in Wichita. And I think as a college student, getting that real world experience is so important in understanding, where your strengths lie and what the day-to-day functions of a job that might interest you look like. And then I think something else that's super important is just understanding if you enjoy the work that you're doing and, long-term, can you get up and go into the office every day and enjoy that? So, before those internships, I didn't know the first thing about sales. I didn't really recognize a place for myself in the industry. And I would say, I would encourage you all to get, any real world experience that you can get, regardless of what it may be, or if it's something that you envisioned for yourself. Because I think those are such strong learning opportunities. And the more that you can do to maximize those opportunities, the more you set yourself up for success down the road.
So this question is for both of you. Did you have a mentor or role model who influenced your career and how did they impact you? I know, Kriya, you said that your husband was kind of in the aviation industry, and Holly, I know obviously your mom is in the aviation industry, but was there like another person who influenced it?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've been really fortunate throughout the last few years to have a number of mentors that have been really influential to me. being, like I said, that I started really with no professional experience whatsoever. I think finding confidence was a huge challenge of mine when I kind of first got into the industry. And, I've been really lucky that most of those mentors have sort of shared a similar message with me, which is just that kind of being uncomfortable is a part of growth, and that in an industry, especially one as dynamic as aviation, we're all learning something new every day, and nobody is exempt from that learning. It doesn't matter if it's your first day or if you're in the C-suite. And I think, remembering that your starting point is really just that. And, it's the way that you show up and put in the work to improve and grow every day that really defines you.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, the power of mentorships is transformational. And I've had a number of mentors across my career. And that value is super important in helping you continue to grow. I would expand upon that to say, not only do you need mentors, but you're also going to want sponsorship. And sponsorship is different than mentors. Mentors are going to pour into you. They're going to help you identify gaps. They're going to challenge you, as Holly said, to get out of your comfort zone. Sponsorship is when a leader steps up and says that they're going to promote you, not necessarily into a role, but just advocate for you. And that brings their leadership brand alongside yours. So it becomes that exponential power. So I think as you think about your careers, think about both. Think about absolutely mentorship first, but as you have success in the roles, look for sponsorship.
So my question is for both of you. I know having family members in the same industry can be both amazing and both resourceful, right? So one thing that you guys admire about each other, or something that you learn from each other, if you could share something like
I'll go first. Look, it's humbling and honoring to have your kids, follow into the field that you're in. And it was surprising, like Holly told you, she didn't set out on a journey to be in aviation. And I think, from a mom perspective, what I realized, she's got an older brother who also is in the industry, is that, everything that I did every single day, so indirectly or directly, had an impact on my family, and the experience was kind of rubbing off, if you will. But that's not what I most admire. What I most admire about Holly is, again, I think, growing up in being completely connected, the ability to just onboard information quickly, relevantly, to process that and to package it and to really succinctly and eloquently share that is great. But to be able to do that, like, it's not like a machine. It's with this amazing warmth and connection. Way better than I have. And in fact, it's privilege, because I get the benefit of hearing feedback about Holly. And just last week I was with somebody who I knew that they had been together recently. And he goes, your daughter is amazing, which of course, exceptional is actually the word he used. And I'm like, of course I know this, I'm her mom, right? I've always thought this. But what he said next really challenged me, because, the skill that I really admire in Holly most is her ability to be absolutely present. And so she's in whatever conversation she's in, not multitasking and thinking, and clearly with that warmth that follows through. And I think that that's just such a gift that I know you'll continue to have.
Thank you. So many to choose from for my mom. I think, what's really inspired me, and what I've learned from my mom growing up and just always admired, is her drive and her tenacity. She's always been willing to face a challenge head on. And, something I appreciate the most about her is the way that she advocates for the people around her, whether that be for her customers or for her team, or when it's necessary for change. I think it's really admirable. And, I hope that at some point down the road, I can, be as influential to, people as I know that she's been to so many in this industry.
Thank you.
appreciate that?
So as women in executive and emerging leadership roles, how have you approached earning credibility and authority, as that is sometimes difficult for women?
Well, I think this is a great question. And I'll start by saying, a lot of it is foundational. I was lucky enough to have parents that never put a bias on me. In fact, my parents basically said you can do and be anything that you want. And so when I got into the industry 30 years ago, which it looks different than it does today, I didn't know that gender was a thing. I didn't know that I was maybe a minority. And I just felt like that talent wins, right? If you work really hard and prove yourself, you're going to be afforded opportunities. And so for me, right, wrong, or indifferent, and I think I'm going to say it was a little bit of naivete, right? Because obviously that's not everybody's personal experience, and you have to acknowledge that. And then secondarily, not everybody is as much as a driven challenge junkie as I am. But the one thing that I would say is just if that's not the situation that you find yourself in, don't let that hold too much power over you. Because if you give power to it, it will take power. And sometimes that's a perception that we might even have where we think others are feeling that way and they really aren't. And so I think it's just a balance of ensuring that we don't let it become a thing and take hold. But it's still, I think it's more so just as you enter into the workforce, how do you establish credibility? And I think credibility is based upon doing what you say you're going to do, showing up as a strong teammate and performing. And that will earn the trust and credibility, I think, that you would want to exemplify for your customers, for your teammates, and for your employer.
And I'll kind of piggyback off of that. I think, when it comes to earning those things especially as a young person in the industry, kind of like my mom just said, I mean, it's so easy to underestimate the importance of being dependable and trustworthy and then doing those things with kindness. And, the industry, relatively speaking, is pretty small in the grander scheme of things. And I think the more that you show up as a hard worker and as a good teammate, the more your reputation kind of precedes you and you build your network. And I think that's when people kind of start to look at you with credibility and as a leader.
And I don't think you ever have to know everything, right? Sometimes I think it's okay to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you on that. And even that establishes credibility and gives yourself space to go back and get the answers and learn and build that knowledge base and credibility as well.
So my next question is to you, Kriya.
Okay.
So as somebody who's in a leadership position, it's very important that you create a very inclusive workplace, right? So how do you help create that space for your employees?
Yeah, I think, it's probably one of the things that I'm most proud of over the last 30 years is to see how the face of our industry is changing. And it has to be intentional change every single day, which means that no matter where you sit in the industry, but absolutely for leaders, we have to wake up every single day thinking about ensuring that we have a strong workforce for the future, which means we have to think about people who are different than ourselves. And that's what, to me, that diversity is what really engenders creativity in the best solutions possible. And so it's easy to say, look, I want to work with people who are like me, because this is a lot easier to work with people who are like you. It's predictable, right? But, it's kind of, you can get into this lemming effect where you all kind of go off a cliff together, or you might come to a wrong conclusion. So, for me, I'm a fast processing person. And what I've learned is that, again, I have to get outside of myself and think about the whole of my team. And that starts with understanding, who is on my team, what motivates and drives them, and how do they think and process, and ensure that the ecosystem that I'm setting up is one that's going to give us the space for all of those thoughts and ideas. And I think, that means, oftentimes I need to be really prepared, understanding that my team may not jump in with me, and I may have to drop nuggets for them, but I just have learned to put something out there and just let silence rule and wait for people to process through it. If they need to advance time, I know that, and I'll give it to them in advance so that we can have meaningful and robust discussion. But you need to be able to have meaningful and robust discussion with respect. And so for me, what really has driven that both at Textron eAviation and at Textron Aviation is that both companies, and Textron as well, if you go out, we'll see, have really strong mission, vision, and value sets. And if you can hold to those principles, then you can honor and respect people even when you don't agree. And then you can allow those values to dictate kind of how the dialogue goes. And there's really space for everything. So for us at Textron eAviation, it's people first, integrity always, collaborative mindset. And because we're new, we're evolving with purpose. And so those are our values. And so every discussion that we have, whether we're looking to bring talent on, we want people to know that about us. And then we want to hold our space for meetings to those principles so that we can give space for divergent viewpoints and people.
Then kind of following off of that question, what improvements have you seen in gender, like what improvements have you seen in gender diversity in the aviation industry? And how can each one of us, like about to join the industry, contribute to making aviation a career path for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, 30 years is a long time, right? So there has been goodness that has happened. And so again, like I said, if I go back to my own personal experience where I didn't personally let gender be a thing, what I've learned in listening to people over time is that's not everybody's experience. A lot of people don't have supportive parents or family networks that have encouraged them to continue to push forward. And I once heard a wonderful executive at Delta who was on a panel that I was chairing said, you know, not everybody wants to be a pioneer. Some people just want to be settlers, and we need both, right? And so I think what's happening in the industry is that there are more women that have entered into the industry, whether that's pilot, and sadly not so much in the A&P workforce, absolutely in engineering, absolutely in the support functions, HR, finance, sales, marketing, so on and so forth. Everyone that enters into the industry, we need to create space for, and we need to hold on to so that the industry expands collectively. And because then people like yourself see that, and the hard work that has gone before you should make it just that much easier to come into the industry. And if you're hard charging and want to be the challenge junkie, there's still plenty of space for that. But there's equal space to just come in and be part of a great industry and team. And that doesn't happen by accident. Again, it happens because leaders are intentional about ensuring that when they're looking at talent, you know, we're all in here, we all look different. So our candidate pools should look like society. And that's really sales, because again, you have to mine the fact that there are more people out there with a skill set than maybe just bubble to the surface. So whoever you put forward for a talent pool for a role needs to be diverse, and then the best talent needs to be selected. But we can't just leave it to that. We have to do a better job, a more organized job of getting, you know, onto college campuses like this, telling stories, you know, so that you can see and connect with them. And even down further into the kind of K-12 space. I was privileged enough to serve with the FAA's Women in Aviation Advisory Board in 2020, where the Congress had asked the FAA to really look at what we need to do to move the needle on diversity. And I think when we make it good for one people group, we actually make it good for all people groups. And so a lot of efforting went into looking at the surveys of, in this case, women in particular. And most women who enter into the industry by their own admission come because they have a family friend or a family member who have been in the industry, which tells you the population is getting funneled down pretty small. So our efforts have to get into that K-12 space, because girls get into aviation, they like challenge, they like the idea of that. It's not necessarily the STEMmy aspect of it. And so the more we can do to introduce you know, kids to aerospace sooner as a robust opportunity, the better. And then again, the industry itself is so diverse. And so there's really a place for everybody, whether you want to be in traditional aerospace to space to emerging technologies, and really just making sure we're amplifying that story.
So as women in the industry, whether as an executive or as an emerging leadership role, do you ever feel like you have this responsibility to pave the path for the next generation of women that want to get into this industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have a responsibility to each other and to the industry to, inspire that growth and to bring awareness to the opportunities that are available within aviation. I'll never forget, before I came on board, my predecessor in this role told me that his goal was to leave the territory better than he found it, so that the person who came in behind him could be twice as successful as he was. And I always try to keep that in the back of my mind, day to day. I'm really passionate about being involved with, young professionals and aspiring young professionals in the industry. Because I think it's really important to acknowledge that nobody got to where they are today without a little bit of support from the people who have been there before them. So I think, we all should pay it forward through mentoring, young talent, and, beyond that, just showing up every day and putting our best foot forward and giving 100%, to sort of just inspire and set an example for the next generation.
Yeah, I don't know that I can say it better, but what I'll do is share a story. So, when I entered into aircraft sales, I was the first female in 2007. So it's not that long ago, to sell aircraft for Cessna Aircraft. And the industry writ large didn't look a lot different. It was largely kind of, male dominated. And the archetype that the industry thought it wanted for a sales role was somebody who had sales experience and who was a pilot. And myself as a female and others from the company who didn't have that background entered into the field of sales at that time and demonstrated that that was an incorrect archetype. And so do I feel an obligation? Absolutely. When I had the privilege of leading global sales, and when Holly says isn't afraid to affect change, one of the things that we did was we put in place a sales development program. And rather than hiring an archetype, we went to what we thought were innate skills that we saw across the fielded team, who were all different people, even though they were pretty homogenous as a group. And we said, what if we looked for those traits and taught the technical skills instead? And I'm really proud to say that that kicked off in 2013. And here now, 12 years later, the diversity of the Textron Aviation sales organization looks radically different than when I joined it. And that program is still going strong. And I see it across the industry as well. I see that we're not unique in that regard. And I think that's that intentional effort that has to continue.
And then, I feel like we've kind of briefly touched on it, but obviously aviation is a super competitive industry. So what strategies have both of y'all used to continue to learn in such a fast-paced industry?
Go ahead.
I just love to ask questions. I've always been naturally pretty curious. And it doesn't matter like who you are. You could be one of my customers, a colleague, an industry professional. I think you can really learn so much from just about anyone. And it's one of the things I love so much about the industry is how much there is to learn. But even more so than that, how many people are so willing and happy to share their knowledge with you if you're just, open to asking. So I think, not being afraid to ask questions and like worried about how you might come off if you don't know the answers, you kind of have to just get past that. And then I think beyond that too, staying up to date with industry news and current events that could be impactful to the industry or to my customers in their industry has been really helpful to me.
Yeah, and I would say it's humbling, right? I mean, I spent 27 years cultivating a network, customer base, a product knowledge base at Textron Aviation, only to move to an adjacent space where you think you should know things, but you don't. You're learning all new technologies, all new customers, all new regulatory environment. And so I think it's really just, you have to stay abreast of what's going on and be consuming information as it comes out. And I would say as well, I'm probably biased towards over preparation. Like when I got that first sales role, I had two binders. I had the binder for all the products I was responsible to sell with every single piece of information at my fingertips that I might want or need. And also the products that I was to refer to my colleague who who sold those, so that if ever I got one of those calls, I wouldn't reflect poorly for him, and his chance would be there to open up. So I think it's, it's always better to be over prepared than under prepared. And really the strongest skill, to Holly's point, from a sales perspective, and I would suggest in any relationship, is being able to be an active listener. People are happy to tell you things as long as you're curious and you ask.
So I just want to get like both of your perspectives on this. So how do you see the demand in this aviation industry in the future, like the upcoming years, whether that's in private and business, or whether any emerging technologies?
Yeah, do you want me to go? All right, so I guess I'll start in the AAM space, which, our industry is about 100 years old, little over 100 years old, right? Which is amazing. And you think about all of the things that have happened in that 100 years, and there have been a lot of technological advances. But then you think about like industries that existed that don't exist anymore. And I think that's one of the reasons why investing in future technologies, which is what I'm privileged to do today, is so important. Not just for the technology's sake, but our vision at eAviation is to positively transform aviation by the deployment of smart technologies, right? And that's really about the technology itself, but it's about engaging with the workforce to make sure that we have a robust kind of ecosystem going forward. So I think, you'll see continued investment in technologies. It's not going to wholly change the industry. It should be an augmentation of the industry as it exists today. And as technologies advance over time, kind of expand the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I think it's been an exciting few years in terms of private and business aviation, where you've seen a lot of individuals and business owners realize that, it's so much more attainable than what they may have originally assumed. So I'm hopeful that we'll see that continued interest and growth in the industry. And then I think it's also just an exciting time in terms of, continued innovation, whether that be with new products or new technologies, but simultaneously, we're seeing a reinvestment into existing platforms, which has largely been driven through customer feedback. So I think all in all, I'm excited to, see more people realize, what a tool aviation could be for them and their businesses. But I'm also excited for our customers who are current owners and operators that are reinvesting in the industry and knowing that, we're changing and we're evolving with them.
Okay, kind of shifting away from the aviation focused questions for both of you, what has been the most unexpected lesson that you've learned in your career so far?
So many to choose from. I think the power of opportunism. So, I think, that is not something that is, comes innate. But, as Holly said, everybody needs help, right? And so if you don't, what I've learned is that if you don't speak your dreams into the ether, then people won't know, right? The businesses are an amalgamation of people that do a thing. And so, if we don't tell people what we want to do and who we want to be, they don't just automatically know what we want. And I think then it's what's been most surprising to me is just kind of the timing of that, right? In terms of sometimes it's, you can, selfishly say, oh, I'd like to go do a thing. And maybe it takes years for that thing to manifest, or maybe it takes a matter of months. And that's kind of just been kind of a fun thing to reflect on over 30 years.
And I think, my mom kind of already said it in another question. But I think the thing that surprised me most is that it's okay to not have all the answers, but it's also equally important to know what you don't know. I think my biggest concern getting into sales was that I would get in front of a customer and they would ask me a question and I wouldn't know the answer. And it probably took me all but like one day before that happened. So looking back, it was such an unrealistic concern because it's so inevitable, because nobody knows everything. And I've actually found, with colleagues and customers alike, it builds so much trust in that relationship to be able to admit what you don't know, but being able to follow through on finding that answer and then delivering on the request is important as well. And then I think the more you get comfortable and confident having those conversations, I mean, you only get a question that, asked a question you don't know the answer to once, and then you know it. So that's how you kind of start to organically build up your knowledge, and your confidence in having those discussions.
So, I know some of the audience here might be even going into the industry right now or in the upcoming years, maybe. So from your experience, Kriya, like, what do you think is the most important step that the industry needs to take right now to create more opportunities for young professionals getting
Yeah.
into the industry?
I think it's it's just incumbent, it's encouraging because I see this across our company and just the industry at large, which is continued investment in kind of exploration and growing in the industry while maintaining that tether to the things that we've already done. I believe that, as long as we as an industry continue to make investments that are founded on kind of the wants and needs of the customer, whoever that customer might be, the customer of an aircraft at Textron Aviation, to a consumer of a technology. That's what we need to do. And then we need to amplify it because there's a lot of competition out there, right? And so, you might study aerospace engineering, but that doesn't mean that you have to go into aerospace. It means you could go into automotive or into IT or anywhere that you want to. And then it only becomes exponentially harder for all of the business support functions that kind of wrap around the aerospace industry. So we have to be compelling, and we need to be able to demonstrate that what we're doing is, exciting, innovative, meaningful. I think meaningful work is what drives us as humans. We want to feel valued and know that the contributions that we're making make a difference, no matter where on that value chain within the company you set.
So this question is for both of you. Obviously, like difficult times are inevitable in any stage of life, but especially like in your career, there can be difficult times. So what has been like what motivates you to continue pushing through and like pursuing your career?
I love to celebrate the little wins. I think in aircraft sales, those, what you might consider big wins may only come around a handful of times a year. And if you're only able to measure your success by those big wins, you're going to have a lot of tough days in between. And I think there are plenty of little wins that we all have every day that we may take for granted now. And being able to recognize those and celebrate them is key. Because I think if you can find a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment in those things, it's so much easier to weather those difficult times. And then on those days where you do have the big wins, it just makes them that much more exciting.
I think it's a great question because, as I reflect on it, I revel in the grit. Like, tell me something that's hard and I want to go do it and I want to figure it out. Personally, that's my personal answer. But that doesn't, but at the same time, I think about it from the position I hold today, which is I'm accountable to today 500 people whose livelihood depends on me showing up as my best self for them every single day. And that's what really motivates me. My motivation is driven by them and ensuring that they feel successful, that they're empowered to be part of the ecosystem. And so, how do I show up for them? How do I maintain relationships with them, connect with them, and then also amplify kind of their passion back through whether that's our parent company to our shareholders and absolutely with the customers that we have on the Pipistrel side.
So I just want to kind of wrap up with the panel with this last question for both of you. I mean, you both are not in in a position where it's not like, 9 to 5 standard hours. It requires more time and effort, right? So how do you kind of balance that both professional and personal lives?
Yeah. I'm terrible at it, and Holly can attest to that because she's lived with me for 20 of those years. And I say that with regret, right? I did not establish a strong work-life balance, and I don't even know if you can have such a thing, but blending it right in a way. And I think what I've learned, especially I think from folks that are newer to the workforce, is the value of that, and how you value that. And I look at it and reflect on it and think, okay, it's not too late. You know, you do work for a really long time, but you have to have interests outside of work. You have people outside of work that also matter, and it can't only be work. And so probably in the last few years, I've been working to try and figure out how to establish that balance and recognize that, one, you know, I'm a reflection to the people who work for me. So even if I love to work, if I work all the time, that signals to them indirectly that maybe I expect them to work all the time and I don't. So that's been a huge grace for me to be able to acknowledge that and lean into that. But what I love to do, like even just resetting when at the end of a day, you know, I'll come home and the first thing I'll do is I'll get on the treadmill and run so I can kind of process through my day. And disconnect from work, so that I can try to be more fully present, which is not a strong skill set for me because I'm usually multitasking across a lot of different things. And so it's a work in progress. I think I look at this generation and I like how you guys do prize that. I like the fact that you put your phones on do not disturb and you do the things that matter to you. And again, like I said, work is season. Sometimes you're gonna have to sprint for a period of time for beyond 9 to 5. 8 to 6, whatever. But then there are other times where, you know, and I could say this in sales where when Holly was a kid, I would take the opportunity to go to a school function if I didn't have a customer event, even though it was the middle of my workday, because I knew I was putting in more time than that.
Yeah, and I think with sales, no 2 days are really gonna look the same. You spend a lot of the time on the road. And for me, knowing that it's so important and was so important to me when I started to define a strong routine, that I could try to adhere to regardless of where I was or what I was doing. And then making sure that in that routine, I was prescribing time for the things that, you know, allow me to recharge and make me feel fulfilled. In the last, you know, couple months, I've taken up reformer Pilates, which has been really nice for me. I don't know if anybody's done it, but like it's an hour a day that I get to unplug and like my sole focus is making it through the class. It's a lot harder than it looks. And, you know, I think that's key. Everybody has things that make them feel that way and allow them just to focus on themselves. And it's so important to prioritize those regardless of what's going on professionally. Another thing for me is, you know, making sure that I'm saving time for my friends and my family and prioritizing them. You know, being with them, talking to them makes me feel so re-energized. And I think it's so important to have hobbies and interests in people outside of work that can give you that enriching and fulfilling life so that you can show up and put your best foot forward professionally.
Thank you so much for the
pleasure.
Yeah, we will just open up for the questions if anybody has questions. Go ahead.
Good, okay. First of all, thank you, Kriya and Holly, for coming. I wanted to ask, I know earlier from a sales perspective, you mentioned how you go about approaching relationships. I wanted to ask how you go about maintaining those relationships over time.
Yeah, that's a great that's a great question because again, you know, it's not a one and done thing. I think it's really important to be able to cultivate and maintain those. And so, you know, for me at eAviation, it was easy because across the value chain, I was always touching customers. Now that I'm not there any longer, it's an intentional reach out to the people who, you know, were more than customers. They became really friends and continuing to have points of connectivity with them, so that I understand what's going on in their world, and we've maintained that relationship. In a sales relationship, I think it is equally important because, you know, again, you're not necessarily getting that sale on day one. So maybe Holly, you can talk a little bit about how you've done that since you've been in territory.
Yeah, I would say internally, just to kind of touch on that, I always make sure, you know, I started out in Wichita, so there were a lot of people that support me now that I was seeing every day, back then that I don't see as often anymore. So I always make sure to stay in touch with them when I'm on the road and driving. I always call people and just check in with them. When somebody helps me out, I'm always sure to thank them for the work that they did to support me. And, it sounds super intuitive, but those are things that can easily kind of fall by the wayside if you don't, make them a priority. And then from a customer perspective, a goal that I've recently had for myself was just that, every customer I meet, I want to have something in common with them outside of work and outside of aviation and the reason that we've met. Because, in sales, we have so many competitors and so many great salespeople who are coming in and selling a good product. And what's really going to differentiate you is, having something in common with them beyond that. And then, making sure that you're, following up on that, following up when you're in the area, calling on them, sharing information that you think may be relevant to them. And then I just go back to being dependable, when they start to come with you with requests, being timely on following through with them and just continuing to build that trust, because the aviation and aircraft sales, I mean, that purchase isn't, usually something that happens pretty quickly. You usually have to stay on top of it. So just, keeping them at the forefront of their mind. And then when the time is right, being able to move quickly.
Thank you both for being here. What are some of the most rewarding aspects as you guys have found of being in sales in the industry?
For me, I love learning about our customers and how they use our aircraft. When you go into it, there's sort of this misconception about private aviation and who flies our airplanes and what they do with them. But you'll find that, people are using them to grow their businesses. People are using them to visit family and to, just do really amazing things all across the world. And I think for me, that's what's the most rewarding, is just remembering that, if you can play some part in that, you've been very impactful.
Yeah, I don't know that I can say different than Holly, because for me, it's understanding the story behind the purchase and the people behind it. And I can tell you, that the places I've been and the things I've been exposed to in other industries not related to aviation, because of the relationships and spending time with customers, from being in a cheese factory to, a pastry factory to car dealerships, and learning about all these other people's businesses and their lives is really, is really probably the most rewarding. In fact, to me, the most impactful will always be the first customer I ever met. When I was in Pro Parts in that inside sales role and totally equipped to be selling a program, but understanding that this was a couple in their mid-60s. They were in Wisconsin. They had started their business in their basement years ago, and now they were doing business with Walmart, which they needed to be able to get to Bentonville at a moment's notice. And I just thought, these people are self-made. They've worked really hard, and this is a productivity tool from them. And that was such an impactful story. All the way to the fact that, I'm not going to lie, I mean, getting the sale is a huge adrenaline rush. And like when I took over my territory, I took it over from two guys who knew I was coming into the territory. So like they laid scorch and burn to it and tried to close up every single deal that they could. But again, just being willing to go out there and meet people where they are. I went up to Cottonwood Falls, Arizona, to have lunch with a car sales guy and his son. They flew a really old product. And so I don't think my predecessor had really invested in the relationship. And I didn't know if I was going to sell them an airplane. I just needed to meet people, right? And they were really great guys. And like 3 years later, they bought an airplane. And like I know that without that work, without taking that initiative to spend time with somebody that didn't look obvious, they maybe would have never bought a product. And they've bought other product from us since then. And so, I think it's the pride in taking the time to learn people and invest in those relationships. It's so good. Go ahead.
You mentioned you both weren't expecting to have a career in aviation. How did you educate yourself and learn about aircraft?
Mine was all on the job. Like I went down onto the floor of our service center because I really needed to know, more so than the aircraft itself at that moment, what these parts did. And the guys, you know, could have been intimidating. They could have been dismissive of me. I'm a very low E person on the extrovert scale. So it took a lot of energy from me to go out to a space where I didn't know these guys, but they just made me feel so welcome. And, you know, 25 years later, I was leading that organization and they were still doing the same thing. And to Holly's point, I made sure that they knew how impactful they had been in part of my journey. Yeah, so it was all on the job for me.
Yeah, same with me. I'm not a pilot. I don't have a technical background, so going into it, I was like, I didn't see a way that I could really step into a sales role and be effective at selling to pilots and those highly technical people. But I really do just ask questions, so many questions about it. And I learned so much on the job, not only just, you know, looking at the specs and memorizing them, but understanding how our customers are using their airplanes. So, you know, I have conversations with people all the time, you know, saying that they're looking to go from Miami up into the Northeast and which airplanes can do it. And for me, you know, if I can contextualize it through the conversations I have with other customers and knowing how they're using their airplanes, that's a lot easier for me and that's where the value is at, I think, for customers. So I found that, you know, you don't need to know all of the numbers down to a T, as long as you know, the missions and what's accomplishable with each aircraft.
Thank you both for coming as well. We spoke on maintaining relationships, and I want to know if you guys have ever touched on lead generation to completely new, not current owners and operators, just to completely new consumers. If you guys have any tips on that, if you guys have ever done that.
That's one of the main functions of my role is lead generation and kind of relationship building, especially for we call them concept owners. And I think the key there is not in coming in and trying to lead them a specific direction toward a specific airplane. It's really in selling the value of what business or, private or general aviation can unlock for them. And helping them through the process, because stepping from not owning an airplane into full aircraft ownership, there are a lot of hurdles that you might not originally think of, when you're having that conversation. So knowing what they are and having the solutions for them is super helpful. And then in terms of just like where to look, that's where it's important to stay, up to date on current events. Stay up to date on your local news and understand which kind of industries are emerging and growing, and that's kind of where I would focus my time.
Priya, I'm not very familiar with the eAviation sector of Textron. Could you explain, if you are allowed to, like what projects you're working on or what you have worked on in the past?
Sure. So this is a relatively new business segment. It was stood up in 2022, really to focus on kind of the eVTOL space and advanced air mobility. And so the formation of the company in 22 was really kind of twofold. One, we acquired Pipistrel, which is a brand and a company that was privately founded in Slovenia, and it's about 30 years old. The owner had grown it to a point, but really couldn't scale it. And we were really interested in them because their engineering team were highly innovative. They had already tackled and conquered battery technology, which we knew was really important for us on the as we kind of stepped into exploring the eVTOL space. And so that happened in 2022. I didn't come into the company until August of 2023, but today we have 3 segments. So we still have the team in Wichita who are still exploring eVTOL. In a hybrid function. We understand battery technology is not going to give us anything that would have a range payload. So we need to really kind of look at kind of what could a hybrid technology yield, as well as really listen to the customer in terms of what they would want in that type of a vehicle. We acquired a company last May in Munich, which is like 30 engineers who are focused on fly-by-wire technology. So it's all of the algorithms that go into moving flight controls, which again, for the AAM space is required, right? Because you either have a complexity of a vehicle that is not like a conventional aircraft, or like ourselves, we actually have unmanned vehicles. So we need to have that action for us. So they're doing that. And then the Pipistrel team are operational. So that's out of the 500 people, that's about 400 people. where we're selling and delivering product today, whether it's the Velis Electro like Embry-Riddle has with us. We have a complement to that, which is the Alpha Trainer. It's a light sport aircraft, also a training aircraft. And then we continue the product development there as well with the Panthera, which we will bring to market in late 2027, which will be, really the first new clean sheet design investment in a high-speed piston aircraft in probably 20 years. So we're super excited for that. And then all the way up to this very large kind of Cessna Caravan sized cargo drone that we just recently hovered. So it's a disparate team, all have kind of pieces of the puzzle. So we work independently and also collaboratively towards those goals.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Let's go from there and then we go there. Yeah. Sure.
I have a lot of questions already, so I have one more question.
Sure.
So Textron has been expanding most of the time by like acquiring a lot of new companies. So I try to understand, like, do you have a specific unit that's always looking for a company to expand, or we have a strategy to expand? And how long it would take for you to like identify a company and close the transaction?
Yeah, so Textron does corporately have a mergers and acquisitions team, which, as you can imagine, receives unsolicited offers frequently. As well as, I might receive such offers. If I received those and was interested, I'd work with them. But the way that it works best is when the business segment identifies a need or an opportunity that they either, from whether it's maybe a technology, maybe it's a market segment, maybe it's a vertical integration of supply chain, that they'll identify and serve up to that M&A team, and then the business segment and the M&A team collaboratively work to understand if that's a good acquisition target. And the timing just varies on a number of factors, as you could imagine.
I just have one quick question. Holly, you mentioned how when you're talking to clients, sometimes you get that question and you just don't know how to answer. How do you respond to that client?
Oh, I usually just say, I don't know off the top of my head, but let me look into it and I'll get back to you. And that is like perfectly enough for them normally. And I think so much better just to admit that than to get yourself, dig yourself into a hole where all of a sudden you're saying the wrong thing. Because it's so much harder to come back from that than just admitting, that you just don't know.
So it seems we're going back and forth between technology and eVTOLs and then soft skills. So I want to make two questions, one for soft skills and one for technicalities. So I'm the vice president of the investing club here at the University of College of Business. One of the things we keep in mind whenever we are evaluating companies is to make sure they have a moat. So it's, something that gives the company competitive advantage and difficulty of entry. Do you see that happening in the eVTOL segment? That's something at least myself would like to see going in the future. So I think it's definitely a technology that's going to stay. I just want to see from your perspective if we're going to generate that moat, if Textron is going to have moat, and that way we're going to prevent competition from happening and keep thriving.
Yeah, like I think that's probably one of the most interesting things that I've experienced. Like, business aviation is pretty competitive, as Holly said. I mean, there's a lot of good products out there and good sales team, and so you're competing for the total addressable market with products that are here today. What is happening in the advanced air mobility space is it's probably kind of like the Wright brothers. Like, a lot of people are trying a lot of things. And when you're working towards new technologies, you kind of need that incubator of sorts. And so I think the thing that's been most interesting to me is I like to call it competitive friends. Where you're really holding a lot of information back in the, who your customers are, who you're talking to in traditional aircraft. You absolutely have to do that. In our space, we're not sharing any IP, absolutely, but we have to also bond together in kind of this friendly relationship, because we're shaping regulatory, kind of rulemaking. We're also, looking at infrastructure needs and all these things. And so you have more than 250 entities out there that are investing in the space. Not all of them, and none of them are, are doing it exactly the same way. And so I think time will tell, right? I can't tell you today who's going to be successful and who's not. But from a Textron perspective, what we know is that we are an aerospace company and a defense company. And from a technology perspective, there's application for these products in this space. And we think to kind of the barriers to entry, I don't want to say it's a barrier to entry, but one of the competitive advantages that I think that we have is that we actually have been through the engineering, the manufacturing, the cert process. Those are all three really tough, nuts to solve, right? Or to crack, right? So, and the regulatory one and being able to actually get a product certification probably being the largest. So I don't know how we're going to judge success. Right now, we need the many to get to the few, but I think that what you'll see over the next several years, and you're already seeing it this year, unfortunately with Lilium, and then Volocopter has changed hands, is you will see either players that do drop out, or there will be consolidation, there will be collaborations. But we need to stay the course because again, we want to define the next century.
Yeah, nice. I guess my soft skill question was, have you ever seen a salesperson that cannot sell ice to an Eskimo become a good salesperson? Or you think you have to have it?
Maybe our last question, because this is.
Have I ever seen? Look. I think sales is hard. Sales is gritty, and you're gonna get a lot of no's for every yes. What I think is there's not a single archetype that is successful selling. I've seen a lot of people be successful, but they're successful because they have a core set of common traits, and they have different traits, but you have to have a core set of common traits, I think, to be successful.
I'll even take a stab at that one.
Oh, I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen anybody that I would say, is it like, in my experience, it's a bad salesperson. But I think, yeah, my mom is right. I mean, there are certain qualities that we all have in common. I think if you're going to be in a field-based role, you have to be a self-starter. You have to be able to wake up every day and know what your goals are for that day and be able to accomplish them, even if nobody's telling you what to do. I think it does take a lot to be able to power through all of those no's and not get discouraged until you get that yes. And I think so much of sales is just knowing the customer and knowing the value of what you're selling. And if you can learn those things and if you can be relatable, if people like you and can relate to you, I think you can find a lot of success in sales.
And let's give a round of applause.